Every step you take is a prayer. Every step you take is a prayer, is a central theme in the award-winning novel, The Seed Keeper, by Dakota author Diane Wilson. And it highlights the indigenous embodiment of connecting to the earth, protecting ancient practices, and honoring ancestors. Every step is a sacred act. The Seed Keeper book is about the complexity of human existence, the suffering, the disconnection, the reconnection, the enduring hope passed down generation to generations. Seeds are saved. Seeds are saved and buried and planted and scattered and stolen and altered and found and harvested. And in the Dakota tradition, seeds are the keepers of their story. Although I'm not much of a gardener, you can just ask my husband. He has the green thumb. Nor am I of a Dakota tradition. I resonate with the embodied prayer. I resonate with the planting and the cultivating and the harvesting and the importance of seed keeping. And much like the characters in the Seed Keeper book, the 12 disciples who Jesus called, commissioned, and sent out to harvest in today's reading, and like many of us, we do not feel adequate enough for this task. We do not feel ready or equipped enough for this great responsibility before us. My first day at St. Anne's Hospital, my first day of field education in the Clinical Pastoral Education Program, CPE, was a big day. My program supervisor, Marika, and Sister Carol, the director of Spiritual Life, they prayed and anointed all of us students coming in and sent us out. Sent us out onto the floor on our own to go visit patients before any class time began. Wait, what? I responded. You have what it takes, they said, when they noticed my hesitation. I would not have put it this way at the time, but we were being asked, sent out to carry and harvest the seeds of compassion room to room in the hospital. The first patient I went to was asleep. Phew, thank goodness. The second patient didn't want any spiritual care. I'm okay today, chaplain. Okay. I dusted off my shoes, kept going. The third patient was getting ready for surgery. I thought I was interrupting, but no. I quietly said, could you use a prayer? And he welcomed the prayer and was grateful for that, a greater sense of peace as they pushed him down the hallway on the gurney. When I knocked on the other patients' doors, they preferred I did not enter. I was dismissed. I was yelled at, told to go away. I prefer you didn't come in, not ready yet. Come back another time. Others waved me in, gratefully. Smiled, relieved that someone was coming to visit. We held hands, we had simple conversations, we had deep conversations, we had benign conversations like, look at that rain. I made mistakes, I said dumb things. I beat myself up on my way out. Why did I say that? But still, I continued. And I walked slowly to each room, paying attention to my breath. I walked intentionally up and down the flights of stairs. There's lots of stairs at St. Anne's. Praying in my every step. Between rooms, I bowed my head in the chapel, stepping off the floor for a break. Asking God, show me, guide me, give me strength to provide what you need me to bring today for you. I prayed with and for my patients. I prayed for their families. I prayed for the medical team in my walking and in my presence without words. Regardless if they were Christian or not, I prayed for them. I sat with them. I got out of the way and let Jesus do his thing and work through me. Still nervous, though, during that first unit of CPE. I learned a lot. And the biggest thing I learned was to learn to sit quietly and listen and meet people where they are in that moment. I learned to enter with soft footing and patience. I learned to trust the Spirit. I learned it was never about me and never will be about me. It's always about God and harvesting the seeds of love. The seeds of hope, the seeds of being carried, the seeds were being carried and being planted and resurrected and harvested and reharvested. Through all of that brokenness I met in those rooms. Curing the sick, casting out demons, unharnessing, seeking out the lost and the helpless. God's story was brought forth in these compassionate care visits, in the small increments, in deep and loud and quiet, growing increments. And increments I will never know how far those seeds of hope reached, particularly when I thought I made no difference at all. God was at work. Every step was a prayer. Looking back now, our newly commissioned chaplaincy team of students, we were learning to harvest the good news in the suffering, in the despair, in the worry, in the tiredness, in the complexity of family drama, in the believers, in the I don't care much about your Christian faith. We were harvesting the good news in the conversation about why did God do this to me? Where is God now? Why has God left me? We were harvesting the good news in the gratitude for those visits, for those simple prayers, for those simple exchanges that another human cares about me. In the complexity of all the human and family drama that was in that room and outside and what they were going home to, in the complexity of the human drama and the culture in which we live. Bringing the message of compassion to those who had ears to hear, to those who were open to receive peace, and who welcomed us to enter into their hearts. Hope met us there. Hope set us all free. Hope was and is and will always be ready for harvesting. Cultivating a presence of care in each room, in the ER and at the nurse's station and in the hallways and in the lunchrooms, I discovered the heaviness, the joy, the honor, the authority given to me and to other fellow disciples of the cross to carry seeds of the gospel, seeds of an ancient story of Easter people, for which we all belong. Generations of God's people, a lineage of complexity, of imperfection, a lineage of connection and disconnection, of betrayal, of suffering, of death and renewal. Wanting nothing in return, God's abundant mercy and grace fed me on those days and continues to feed me now and my fellow disciples of the cross. When Jesus saw the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harnessed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore I ask the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into the harvest." Jesus summoned his 12 and gave them authority over unclean spirits to cast them out, to cure every disease and every sickness. A collection of misfits. Fisherman, a tax collector, a Jewish zealot who was a radical, fierce, and violent protester against the Roman Empire. And also part of that 12 was the soon-to-be famous betrayer, Judas. He commissioned them to carry and harvest the seeds of peace, to embody hope and connection in a world of disconnection, to bring forth healing and wholeness, to carry God's ancient story, knowing that they would be met with opposition. Not all would appreciate this type of harvesting. Not all appreciate this type of compassionate care. Yet he sent them out. He sent them out like sheep in the midst of wolves, in the midst of the wolves of the culture of the day, advising them to be wise like serpents and innocent like doves. Assuring them when flogged, when siblings turn against them, when persecuted for their compassionate mission, the Spirit of the Father will speak through them. As if to say, keep going. Keep planting, keep cultivating, keep harvesting, keep carrying the sacred story forward. Proclaim as you go, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Allow the Spirit to guide you. Jesus commissions us, just like those 12 misfits of his disciples. We are Jesus' hands and feet and disciples of today. By our baptism, confession, and our acceptance of the gifts of the Spirit, we all have been given authority to be laborers of the field, to harvest, to be harvesters of hope, to be seed keepers of the gospel. The church, a collective misfits of disciples, imperfectly perfect people of the cross, representatives of the Holy Bible, are called to follow the healing Christ and are sent out to embody compassion, which requires knowing the harvest assignment, which requires listening and responding to the current wolves and the current cultural crisis at hand. In other words, where is God calling us today is the question. Where is God calling us today is where we are to harvest the good news, the seeds of hope. The church itself is an institution that is one voice in a cultural network of care, wrote Peggy Way, author of Created by God, Pastoral Care for All God's People. She points out you cannot separate church and culture. You cannot separate compassionate care and culture. They are intertwined. The cultural crisis shifts from generation to generation. Each generation has their own crisis to respond to. We talked about one a few weeks ago when we lifted up the stories from our World War II servicemen and women and what the church did, responding to the moment. Deep listening is a radical requirement, especially when it comes to carrying seeds of hope and healing. Compassionate care goes in and sits with the tension of the day. At the bedside of the dying, the widow, the addict, the unhoused, the food deficient, the abused and the abuser, the disabled and the divergent learner, the marginalized, the sick, the elderly, the child, the immigrant, the less thans, the politician, the elitist, and the enslaved. Sitting with the systems of injustice. The contradictions and response rest in prayer. In the seed of hope we carry. Another time in our church's history was in 1844. You might know what I'm about to say. In 1844, the church took a courageous vote, took a brave stand against slavery. After sitting at the bedside of church and culture, the intersection of compassionate care and culture and ethics, long enough, they took a stand. This church was sent out, commissioned by their faith to respond, and knocked on the door and entered the debate and took a stand. And it all began related to the American Board of Commissioners of Foreign Missions and Slavery. This church, along with a few other congregational courageous churches of the time, felt the board was not doing enough to condemn slavery in places missionaries were sent. Many opposed this stand, and as you can imagine, some may have left the church. Probably some said, "Don't waste those precious gospel seeds on this hallowed ground. Harvest in places of less risk." But the church persisted and went out, stood tall in this action, unwavered, caring and planting and harvesting the seeds of hope and truth and equality and justice, endured persecution, endured ridicule, endured betrayal by their siblings, by their community, by other Christians. Our forefathers knew the assignment. It wasn't until June 19th, 1865, 21 years later after this vote, and nearly 2 years after President Lincoln emancipated enslaved Africans in America, Union troops arrived in Galveston Bay, Texas, with news of freedom, commemorating the first Juneteenth celebration. 21 years after the church voted and took this courageous stand. Imagine that. History proved the church to be on the right on the issue of slavery, wrote Reverend Leroy Hastings in the 175th anniversary church history booklet. But not before the country was torn apart by the Civil War and the man who was working to reunite the country was killed by an assassin. The church joined in the National Day of Fasting after Lincoln's death. This story, this scripture reading, the seed-keeping book, inspires us and begs the question, where does care and culture meet today? Where does church and culture intersect today? We're faced with it every day. What bedside of contradiction do we find ourselves sitting at locally, regionally, nationally? How do we want to embrace our call and authority as disciples of the cross at this time and place in history? When Jesus saw the crowds, he was moved by compassion. Compassion is not empathy. Compassion is like this deep feeling in your gut where you feel like you need to make a difference. You feel like there's something going on and something is really getting to you, getting to your heart. When Jesus saw the crowds, he was moved by compassion. When we look out at the crowds today, what moves us by compassion, individually and as a church? This is God's mission for us. Jesus commissions us and sends us out, sends us to places of contradiction, sends us with courage, sends us out on assignment, sends us to those places of pain, for compassion moves us there. whether we feel equipped or not, whether we're ready or not. Compassionate care goes in anyways and sits with the tension of the day. And we are called to respond. And we will know what that is when we are sitting in prayer, when we discern together. As disciples of the cross, we are called to carry forward the seeds of compassion, harvest the good news, the ancient story of God's love, the story of our people, the Easter people. We are a part of generations upon generation of God's people, a lineage of complexity, connection, disconnection, betrayal, forgiveness, suffering, death, and resurrection, which is hope and renewal. Let us cultivate, plant, and harvest a presence of care, a presence of compassion at the bedside of pain and the brokenness in the world and in the contradictions and in the tension. Let us deeply listen and respond to the assignment before us as the gospel seed keepers, the seed keepers of hope. And let every step be a prayer, for every step is a sacred act of compassion. Praise be to God. Amen.